into our 12 steps of spiritual, or 12 steps to spiritual recovery, step 9, and we're calling this an eye for God. Step 9 is I treat each day as an opportunity to see and experience God in all people, places, and things. This sounds like a fairly tall order, but if we do some simple things just to bring mindful awareness to every aspect of our life, it seems like these technical issues are providing the opportunity to do that. So, but as I said last week, it's these kinds of things that make up so much of our life. It's the little things that don't work quite right and that can tend to, draw our attention to other places where we don't really want it to go. But we find ourselves dwelling there, and that becomes the quality of our experience. And so if we treat each day, and I would even say each moment, as an opportunity to see and experience God in all people, places, and things, what these steps are reminders of things that we can do as we go through our day. And not any one of them that we've shared so far is a quick fix or a fix-all. I guess the bottom line to all spiritual practice is being aware of what's going on in our mind at any given time. Are we aware that we're living in the presence of God? Are we aware that that's the source of our being right now? Or have we shut ourselves down to where we are not able to experience that momentarily? So any practice like this is just a set of reminders of what is true. When Jesus said that he came to bear witness to the truth, that he gave his life, or he came for this one single purpose, to bear witness to the truth, that's our same purpose, to bear witness to the truth. And to bear witness to the truth is to remember what is true right where we are. And so if we're going through life and we're struggling with the little things that nip at us, we just pause for a moment and recognize that we're in the fullness of God right now, that we can never be out of that one presence and one power. And for those who think of God as the man upstairs, and that's probably all of us at some point in our lives, this 9th step may seem impractical. When Jesus said God is spirit, and those who worship God must worship in spirit and in truth, he was presenting a different kind of picture. And I like to make this contrast because most of us grew up with this old man in the sky, the man upstairs, this whole idea of when will God intervene? Is God going to do something about the problems in the world? We treat God very much as a human being with superpowers. But when Jesus said God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth, that's a whole different picture. It's a whole different idea. Because we're going from an anthropomorphic vision that is a human-like picture of God. And we get this largely from the Old Testament, although Jesus referred to God as Father, and that kind of adds fuel to that fire. But he referred to God as Father in the sense that God is an all-providing source. When he said God is spirit, that takes our thinking about God into a whole different realm, because spirit is energy. It's not a being, it's being with capital B. It's not a being, not a spirit, but spirit. It's not localized anywhere, it's everywhere present. So the word for spirit, as I have pointed out many times, the Greek word for spirit is the word pneuma. And it means, it translates as breath, wind, spirit, or soul. The author of Job was in line with this idea when he wrote, "It is the spirit in a man, the breath of the Almighty, that makes him understand." And likewise, today's dictionary defines spirit as an animating or vital principle held to give life to physical organisms. So when Jesus says God is spirit, we're not thinking of a being. We're thinking of an essence. And that's quite a challenge for us to transition over when we're going through our life, especially if we have grown up with the man upstairs, thinking of God as a being separate from us, looking over us, looking at our lives and, maybe fixing this problem or that problem, or maybe throwing down a challenge or two to cause us to grow and develop spiritually. But if we think of God as spirit, it's a whole different mindset. The breath or the wind, we feel its presence, but we can't see it. And that's exactly what is true of spirit. We can't see it, but you can see the result of it every place. Our whole, you look in the mirror and see your own being. That's an expression of spirit, of being. It's an expression of God. It's a very difficult thing to transition out of. This thing that we grew up with, again, the Old Testament gives a very human-like picture of God, not always. Somebody said the Old Testament is an evolution of the God idea. We see all kinds of gods in the Old Testament. We see a God that can be carried in an Ark of the Covenant, that is localized. We see a God that dwells in the oaks of Mamre. We see a God that dwells up on a mountain. And we see a God that dwells within each individual. So there are many different kinds of views of God. The breath of the Almighty, that's what's giving us wisdom. That's what's giving us intelligence. And that's very much in keeping with the idea that one of the elements of God, one of the aspects of God is intelligence. Life, love, power, and intelligence. The breath of the Almighty. That's what gives us understanding. And it's that too is confusing because much of our understanding does not come from the inspiration of Spirit. It comes from our intellectual study. It comes through the senses, through the eyes and through the ears. And so when we think of God, that's how we think of God, as something we can perceive through the eyes and the ears. The people in Jesus' day were asking, when will the kingdom come? When will we be able to see this thing happen? And people are asking that same question today. And what did Jesus say? He answered very much in the vein that God is something you don't see. The kingdom comes not through observation, but it's within us. The kingdom of God is within you. You don't say it's low here or low there. But we are still asking this question. I should say mainstream Christianity is still asking this question. When will the kingdom come? And you can see all these people analyzing all of the world events that are going on and saying, here's a sign, there's a sign, and it's the same story that's been told for thousands of years. Signs that the end is near or the kingdom is coming. But what if, as the Gospel of Thomas says, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth and men do not see it? What if that's the truth? What if this kingdom is spirit, invisible, energy, life, love, and power, and intelligence that is spread out upon the earth, spread out through the cosmos, and we don't see it? What if that's how we are to think of God? And that gives us the ability then to acknowledge God in all people, places, and things. Because if God is not a localized being, if God is being, If God is energy, if God is spirit, that means God can be present in every person we meet, can be present in every situation we're in. Can be present in everything that we have. We could truly say that all is God. But then the question is kicked up, well, what about all the bad stuff going on? Is that God also? And the answer to that is pretty simple. The appearance is not. We do not judge by appearance. But because there's a negative appearance, does it mean there's an absence of God? Is there another way to see what we're looking at here? And the answer to that always is yes. There's always a higher way to see it. There's always a higher vision. If God is spirit, and those of us that worship God must worship in spirit and in truth, that means to not see through the eyes, not judge by appearances, but to judge righteously, to judge and to understand that God is always present regardless of what things look like. Not an easy thing to remember, but that's why we engage in a practice, a multi-step practice, to remind ourselves that this is true. Okay, so we're freezing up on our screen. So I'm not going to mess with this now. I don't know what's wrong with it, but it's not going to advance. But anyway, this idea of God as spirit is it's very profound. And I have used that verse all of my ministerial career and thought I understood it, and it seems to be revealing a new level of understanding now. And part of that is because I'm working on putting all of this into writing in probably a book form. And I'm asking myself the question, if I were to explain everything I've been trying to explain over the last 40 years about my understanding of the nature of God, ourselves, and the nature of our relationship with God, how would I begin? How would I tell this story? How would I explain it? And it's very challenging to do that, but it's very rewarding at the same time. And one of the most critical ideas is how we view the nature of God. And if we claim to view God as spirit, and yet we revert back to our old way of seeing things, our old way of experiencing things, we really haven't advanced in our practice and our understanding. And so that's what we want to keep in mind all the time. And so I asked myself this question, where do you start telling this story where it makes sense? And I have come up with the idea that there are three basic principles that we ask ourselves. How do we view the nature of God? How do we view the nature of ourselves? And how do we view the nature of our relationship to God? If we view God as spirit, that's going to be present a very different picture than if we view God as the old man upstairs. If we view ourselves as miserable sinners separate from God, as mainstream Christianity does, the whole business of mainstream Christianity requires separation from God. We have to be separate from God for it to make sense. Otherwise, there's no need for salvation, because salvation is bringing the soul, individual soul, back into contact with God. And that happens, of course, at death. But if we say that God is in me, the kingdom of God is within me, that changes that whole picture. It changes the whole way I think of things. It changes the way I pray. It changes my understanding of meditation. Meditation becomes a potential to experience God rather than just think about God, meditate on verses about God. And if I see that my relationship to God is not one of separation, but one of oneness, then in those moments I am feeling separate. What do I do with those? How do I get back to that understanding of oneness, that I am one with God? It's a pretty important three areas to look at. How do I view God? How do I view myself? And how do I view my relationship to God? Because the answer to those three questions, those three areas, you can look at any religion on this planet, or you can look at any individual on this planet. You can ask them those three questions. How do you view God? How do you view yourself? How do you view your relationship to God? You ask a fundamental Christian, how do you view God? And you'll get the old man upstairs idea. The powerful being, the creator of the universe, that is separate from us. Because you ask the second question, how do you view the individual? We were born in sin. And unless we accept Jesus Christ as our personal Savior, we will die in sin and we will not make it to heaven, to unity with God. And how do you view the relationship between God and the individual? The mainstream Christian views that as separation, which is why we need salvation. But what if we don't have separation? What if we view God as one with all? Then the spiritual journey becomes something different. It's not about salvation, it's about remembering, it's about recovery. Recovering something we have forgotten. And that is a process. But I like to remind everybody, I think the flagship parable that Jesus gave was the prodigal son. He goes off, does the very worst things anyone can imagine, and he is welcomed back. There's no condemnation. Even when the young son tries to remind the father of how bad he was, the father totally dismisses it. It doesn't matter what you've done. You have never altered your relationship with me. So we are always one with God. We're not separate from God. We are not born in sin, something less than an expression of God. If Genesis says we're created in the image and after the likeness of God, and somehow the mainstream Christian got that wrong, said we're created as something else. And of course they point back to Adam and Eve and all that story. But really the purpose of that story was to answer the question, why do people suffer? Why is life difficult? And life is often difficult. I think we can all agree to that. But I think life in the ancient Middle East, the desert life, was particularly difficult. Why do people suffer? And the answer is because we disobeyed God in the very beginning. And we were cast out of a potential paradise. And we've been having to earn our living by the sweat of our brow ever since. It simply answers that question, why is life difficult? But Jesus comes along, and I think the thing that appealed to people about him was he was talking about spiritual principles in a way that they could relate to. That you didn't have to be an educated rabbi to get it. To say, if you want to know and experience God, go into your inner closet. Go into your inner being. Shut the door of the senses to the world and pray to your Father who's in secret. This is the whole key to understanding our relationship with God. If we are separate from God, why would Jesus teach people to do that? Why would he lay out such a beautiful ideal that God is as close to you as your inner self? That's where you make the connection. And why would he teach that? And the people were used to hearing, you can't do things like that. You have to go through the church or the synagogue. You have to go through our religion. You have to go through our professionals to have a relationship to God. The thing that stands between yourself and God is religion. And you have to abide by the rules of the religion in order to be acceptable by God. And that whole belief system is carried through into Christianity. If you just, as I have said before, if you go online and ask what is required to be saved, just ask this, whatever question, what does it mean to be saved? It all leads to one person, and that's Jesus. But the question that we have to ask is this what Jesus taught? And the answer to that is no, he did not. If you want the purest message of Jesus and his view of the Father, the individual, and the relationship between the two, just look at the prodigal son. Look at that parable. And what Luke did is Luke was coming from the belief in separation. He made the character of the Father, he made that Jesus. If you look at the preface to that particular parable, you'll see that that's what Luke did. That's his interpretation, how he took a story that probably originated from Jesus and created a context that was different from what Jesus intended. And you'll find this so often in the New Testament, that you have a narrative that is created by the authors of the Gospels. And Paul was the first writer, and Mark was the first gospel written. Paul's letters began to appear about 52 to 53 AD. And then Mark appeared around 70 AD. Mark was probably influenced by Paul, but Paul had a picture of Jesus that I don't think Jesus carried himself. And he was very influential. He was a very charismatic individual. But we go from teachings of Jesus. Go within your inner closet, shut the door, pray to the Father who's in secret. The kingdom of God is within you. We go from teachings of Jesus to teachings about Jesus. And that's the hand of the church. Or it began as the early, what was referred to as the Jesus movement, before Christianity really solidified. I would say Christianity started solidifying with the Christian literature, with the writings of Paul and the Gospel of Mark. And I also believe that Mark was probably not written by one person, but by a group, by a committee, because the purpose of Mark is a guiding document. Here's how we are to think of Jesus. And if you look at all the guiding documents that we have that have survived time, the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed, for example, these were not likely written by a single person. They were written by a group, and the group had to agree on what was important. So what did Mark tell us about Jesus? What he told us about Jesus is what the early church had agreed upon. This is who he is, and here's how we think of him. But if we compare that picture with what Jesus himself taught, I think we will get a very different picture. And we have to look deeply. We don't explore the Gospels trying to figure out what Jesus said. If you simply ask the question, what do we think, how did Jesus view God? How did Jesus view the individual? How did Jesus view the relationship between the two? If you ask that question, you will find sayings that come back to the understanding that God is everywhere present. God is spirit. That the individual is an expression of God. Jesus even quoted the book of Psalms. He said, "Ye are gods." He was reminding people of their divinity. Then he would say things like, "I'm in the Father, and the Father is in me, but the Father is greater." If that's not oneness, and he was not speaking of himself personally, John was. But I think whatever Jesus thought of himself, he thought of all. And I think that's why the common person responded so well to him. When we see references to the crowds that followed him, we assume these are the crowds of the common people. That there was something about what he was teaching that they really loved to hear because they had not heard it. They had a professional priesthood that was like a toll booth between themselves and God. And Jesus basically was saying there's no toll booth. That God is in you, God is in me, God is in all of us. God is a loving Father. Why do you worry about the things that you wear, or what you're going to eat, or how you're going to make your life successful when the Father knows you have the needs of these even before you ask? If that's not a depiction of a relationship of oneness with God, I don't know what is. We find these little jewels, we find these little tidbits scattered throughout the Gospels, and the reason that is true is because certain things were written down about Jesus, about things people remembered that he said and taught. There weren't too many people that could write, but the few that could would jot things down, or they would pass it on through word of mouth what they remembered. And so the further we get from the death of Jesus, the more the cloudier the teaching becomes. But these gems are scattered throughout the Gospels. It's like the Gospels are like a net that's been thrown into the sea, and there's good fish and there's fish that we don't necessarily want. The good fish would be those mystical principles of oneness that Jesus probably taught. And the things that are not so appealing to us is all the rest of it that we would toss aside, the fish that we do not want. But we ask the question, how do we identify these fish? How would we go about identifying an authentic saying of Jesus? And we would say, does it fit the principles of mysticism? Does it recognize God as a presence, everywhere present equally at the same time? Does it recognize the divinity of the individual? Does it recognize the oneness between the individual and God? Those are the three pillars of mysticism. And what's interesting is you look at any religion, the mystical aspect of any religion, there is Jewish mysticism, there's Christian mysticism, there's Hinduism, there's Taoism, there's Buddhism, there's Islam. All of these have a mystical element. And all of those rest on the same three pillars. How do we view God? How do we view ourselves? How do we view our relationship to God? And it is a paradigm of oneness. Mysticism is based on a paradigm of oneness. But you can pick up the mystical literature of any age, of any culture, and you will find those same three principles. Religion itself varies. When you get out to the outer edges of religion, we have wars over it. We don't agree with what somebody else is teaching. We have, how many Christian sects are there? I think somebody said 400 and some. And why is there not just one? You know, we are, and I did say sects, S-E-C-T-S. Why not just one? When you get to the mystical aspect of any religion, there is just one. And you could put all the religions in the world together, and they say exactly the same thing. You can quote the Sufis, you can quote the Hindu, you can quote the Buddhist, you can quote any religious mystic, and you could put them all in the same book, and they'd say the same thing. They recognize God as a presence everywhere, omnipresent. So I apologize for our slideshow today, which is non-existent, but hope that some of these ideas will stay with you through the week. I'm not sure how I know how the slideshow is going to turn out on YouTube. I'm gonna fix everything I can, but I can't quote what I didn't read today. So we'll probably just have if you want to see this again, just tune into YouTube later on this afternoon. I try to get up by 4 o'clock every day. So I will do my best to get our technology in order for next week. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for putting up with it, and see you then. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. If you'd like to help support this ministry, just click the donate card at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Your financial support means a lot to us. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. To subscribe to this channel, simply click our logo. Thanks again for your interest in independent unity, and have a wonderful week.